In just 73 seconds, $4 million vanished from the federal budget into senators' personal bank accounts. Zohran Mamdani didn't check his notes. He didn't wait for permission. He lifted a single document marked Arctic Frost and began to read. The chamber froze. What did New York's youngest socialist reveal that made seasoned politicians stop breathing? At exactly 2:14 p.m. on November 19, 2025, the House Administration Committee hearing room buzzed with the usual pre-session chatter. Lobbyists in $1,000 suits whispered in corners, their conversations punctuated by nervous laughter and the clink of expensive watches. Aides shuffled papers with practiced efficiency, their movements choreographed by years of political theater. The marble floors, polished to mirror perfection, echoed with the confident footsteps of power brokers who had convinced themselves they owned this building and everything in it. The air itself seemed thick with entitlement, heavy with the weight of backroom deals and unspoken agreements that kept the machine running smoothly. Committee members filtered in, their faces bearing the practiced expressions of public servants who had long forgotten what service actually meant. Then Zohran Mamdani walked in like a tenant organizer who had memorized every broken promise, every hidden clause, every fine print betrayal that had ever been used to exploit the powerless. His tie was loosened from the morning's budget hearings, a small rebellion against Washington's obsession with perfect presentation. A weathered leather binder hung from his shoulder, its surface scarred by years of use, tabs color-coded in red, blue, and yellow like a battle-tested filing system. The kind of meticulous organization that comes from fighting slumlords in Queens, not glad-handing at cocktail parties in Georgetown. His eyes swept the room with the calm intensity of someone who had spent years reading fine print that others hoped would stay buried forever. Someone who understood that the devil wasn't just in the details, he lived there. In his jacket pocket, a folded copy of the Constitution served as his compass, dog-eared from constant reference during late-night bill reviews. Across the mahogany table sat Senator John Thune, carved in senatorial confidence like a marble statue of institutional power. His flag pin caught the overhead lights at precisely the right angle. Nothing about his appearance was accidental. His smile was practiced, calibrated, the kind that had charmed donors for decades while picking their pockets clean. Behind him, 3 aides clutched tablets loaded with talking points about protecting congressional oversight and defending separation of powers, phrases focus grouped to sound patriotic while masking pure self-interest. But today wasn't about talking points. Today was about accountability. The gavel struck at 2:15 p.m. sharp. Committee Chair Mike Johnson leaned into his microphone, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had survived multiple political scandals through careful deflection. We're here to discuss the recent funding bill and address concerns raised by both parties regarding certain provisions, Johnson announced, his eyes avoiding direct contact with anyone. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Mamdani, has requested time to address the committee. Zohran arose slowly, his movements deliberate. He opened his binder to a red tab marked page 247 and placed his reading glasses on the bridge of his nose. The room's ambient noise died to absolute silence. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," Zohran began, his voice calm but carrying an edge that made spines straighten. "I'd like to read from Section 749C of the Appropriations Bill that passed last week, the section that somehow escaped public debate." Senator Thune's aide leaned forward, whispering urgently. Thune's practiced smile flickered for just a moment, the first crack in the facade. Zohran's fingers traced the highlighted text as he continued, quote, "Any member of the United States Senate shall have the right to civil action against the United States government for damages not to exceed $500,000 per instance of data collection without proper notification." End quote. The first gasp came from the press gallery, sharp and audible in the sudden silence. A reporter's pen clattered to the floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the marble chamber. Photographers adjusted their lenses, sensing blood in the water. "Now, Senator Thune," Zohran continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had done his homework while others were cutting deals, his eyes locking onto the South Dakota Republican like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury, "can you explain to the American people why 8 senators who happened to be under investigation for their role in January 6th, suddenly deserve taxpayer-funded payouts of up to $4 million total. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Several committee members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, suddenly fascinated by their notepads. In the press gallery, phones began buzzing with urgent notifications from editors who could smell a front-page story developing in real time. Thune's face drained of color like water fleeing a sinking ship. His hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles whitening with the pressure of a man watching his carefully constructed world begin to crumble. The aide behind him frantically scrolled through her tablet, searching for a prepared response that didn't exist because no one had planned for this moment of truth. "Congressman Mamdani," Thune stammered, his usual senatorial drawl replaced by something tighter. "This provision simply ensures that—" "Ensures what?" Zohran interrupted, flipping to a yellow tab. "Ensures that Lindsey Graham can sue the Justice Department for tens of millions, as he publicly stated yesterday. Ensures that senators who may have participated in efforts to overturn an election get rewarded for being investigated." The committee room erupted like a volcano that had been building pressure for decades. Chairs scraped against marble as reporters leaned forward, their professional composure abandoned in favor of raw journalistic instinct. Camera operators zoomed in on Thune's increasingly pale face, capturing every micro-expression for posterity. On the gallery, a Democratic aide was already typing furiously on her phone, her fingers moving with the speed of someone who understood they were witnessing history. The C-SPAN cameras, usually relegated to boring procedural footage, suddenly became the most valuable real estate in media. Cable news producers across Washington began frantically calling their control rooms, demanding immediate cut-ins to regular programming. Within minutes, Mamdani Exposes Truth began trending on Twitter, climbing the charts faster than a scandal in an election year. TikTok videos were already being edited, capturing Zohran's most devastating lines. Instagram stories proliferated across political accounts, spreading the confrontation to audiences who normally ignored congressional hearings altogether. But Zohran wasn't finished. He flipped to his blue tab, financial records obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request that had taken 8 months to process. "Let's follow the money," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a scalpel through diseased tissue. "Because that's what this is really about. That's what it's always about in this town." He held up a thick folder of documents. The Arctic Frost investigation cost taxpayers $32 million. Justice Department resources, FBI personnel, court proceedings, grand jury proceedings, secure communications, witness protection, all to investigate whether elected officials broke their oath to the Constitution. $32 million to ensure accountability. He paused, letting the number hang in the air like smoke from a fire that was about to consume everything in its path. "And now, Senator Thune, you're asking those same taxpayers, the ones who funded the investigation, to pay the people who were investigated. $4 million in potential payouts to senators for being investigated for potentially criminal activity. It's like asking a murder victim's family to pay for their killer's defense attorney." Senator Thune's aide slid a note across the table. He glanced at it, then crumpled it in his fist, a gesture caught by every camera in the room. "The Biden administration weaponized the Justice Department," Thune finally managed, his voice strained. "This provision provides necessary accountability." "Accountability?" Zohran's voice sharpened. "Senator, I represent Queens. I have constituents who can't afford their rent, who skip meals to pay for prescription drugs. You're asking them to fund a $4 million golden parachute for senators who earn $174,000 a year and have access to the best legal representation money can buy." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the court reporter stopped typing. Zohran flipped to his final tab, a stack of printed social media posts and news articles he'd compiled that morning. Yesterday, Senator Graham said he would sue for far more than $500,000. Senator Tuberville called for special counsel Jack Smith to be thrown in jail and promised to sue the living hell out of Biden officials. These aren't statements about accountability. These are threats of revenge, funded by taxpayer dollars. The energy in the room shifted palpably. What had started as a routine hearing had become a public execution, broadcast live on C-SPAN and streaming across every major news platform. Republican Representative Austin Scott, visibly uncomfortable, leaned into his microphone. I agree with the gentleman from New York. This provision represents the most self-centered, self-serving piece of language I've ever seen in legislation. Even Republicans were jumping ship. Senator Thune's face had progressed from pale to ashen. Sweat traced his temple despite the air conditioning. His aides had stopped pretending to look busy and were staring at their hands. Furthermore, Zohran continued, his voice now carrying the moral authority that had gotten him elected. This provision was inserted in the final hours before the shutdown vote. No public debate, no committee markup, no transparency. It was slipped in like a thief in the night, hoping no one would notice until the checks were already cut. A phone buzzed in the press gallery. Then another. CNN was cutting to breaking news. Fox News pulled their scheduled programming. MSNBC anchors were scrambling to understand the implications of what they were watching unfold live. Committee Chair Johnson, recognizing the political disaster unfolding in real time, attempted damage control. The gentleman's time has expired, Mr. Chairman, Zohran said. Still standing, his voice carrying across the room without amplification. I yield back my time. But I have one final question for Senator Thune. The room held its collective breath. Senator, when you go home to South Dakota tonight, when you look in the mirror, how do you explain to yourself that you used your position to personally enrich your colleagues while American families struggle to survive? How do you justify turning Congress into a get-rich-quick scheme? Senator Thune's mouth opened, then closed. No words came. For the first time in his decades-long political career, John Thune, a man who had built his reputation on smooth talk and backroom deals, was speechless. The hearing room exploded into chaos. Reporters bolted for the doors. Phones rang incessantly. Aides huddled in frantic whispered conferences. But in the eye of the storm sat Zohran Mamdani, calmly closing his binder and adjusting his glasses. He had done exactly what he came to do: expose the corruption, follow the money, and speak truth to power. By 3:00 p.m., the House had scheduled an emergency vote to repeal the provision. By 4:00 p.m., even Republican senators were distancing themselves from the payout scheme. By 5:00 p.m., Lindsey Graham was walking back his threats to sue, suddenly discovering that maybe this isn't the right approach. The vote came at 7:23 p.m., 46-0. Ununanimous. Republicans and Democrats, progressives and conservatives, all united in their disgust at the naked self-dealing that Zohran had exposed. In his small office overlooking the Capitol, Zohran sat reviewing constituent emails about housing assistance requests and Medicare coverage gaps. Real problems affecting real people, the kind of issues that had motivated him to run for office in the first place. His phone buzzed with interview requests from every major network, book agents, speaking engagements, the kind of opportunities that Washington offered to those who played the game correctly. He deleted them all. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Sarah, his chief of staff, poked her head in. Boss, there's someone here to see you. An elderly woman from Astoria stepped into the office, her hands clutched around a small purse. Mrs. Rodriguez, whose rent had doubled in the past year, whose Medicare didn't cover her insulin, whose grandson was struggling to find work. Mr. Mamdani, she said softly, I saw you on the news today. Thank you for fighting for us. Zohran stood, gesturing toward the chairs across from his desk. Mrs. Rodriguez, please sit. Tell me what's happening with your housing situation. As she spoke about her struggles, about choosing between medication and groceries, about the fear of eviction, Zohran was reminded why he had exposed the Arctic frost provision in the first place. It wasn't about the headlines or the viral moments. It wasn't about embarrassing senators or scoring political points. It was about this, about ensuring that government worked for people like Mrs. Rodriguez, not for politicians looking to cash in on their positions. Outside his window, the Capitol dome stood illuminated against the darkening sky. Inside that building, senators were probably plotting their next scheme, their next way to bend the system to their advantage. But for 73 seconds that afternoon, truth had won. Transparency had triumphed over backroom dealing, and a young socialist from Queens had reminded Washington that someone was watching, someone was reading the fine print, Someone was willing to call out corruption no matter how powerful the perpetrators. The Arctic frost provision died that night, along with any illusion that such blatant self-dealing could survive public scrutiny. $4 million stayed in the Treasury, available for programs that actually helped Americans instead of enriching the already powerful. And in a small office overlooking the capital, Zohran Mamdani continued the work that had brought him to Washington, fighting for the people who elected him, one bill at a time, one constituent at a time, one moment of truth at a time. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a campaign contribution or a lobbyist's promise. Sometimes it's just someone brave enough to read the fine print and speak it aloud when the whole world is watching. In politics, they say timing is everything. But Zohran Mamdani had learned something else. Truth is everything. And on November 19, 2025, for exactly 73 seconds, truth was the only thing that mattered in Washington, D.C. The question now isn't whether corruption will try to hide in future bills. It will. The question is whether someone will be watching, someone will be reading, someone will be brave enough to stand up and speak the truth when it matters most. If this story of political courage inspired you, hit that like button and subscribe for more moments when truth defeats power. Drop a comment below. What would you have asked Senator Thune in that moment? And remember, democracy only works when we're all paying attention to what happens in those marble halls of power.